Okay, so Dr. Ingram is here. Lucas and Will and Maren have joined us. Unfortunately, our other guest, Katie Evans, has had to bow out at the last minute, but such is life. Perhaps we can wait a minute or two to see if anybody else arrives, and then we can start conversation. Yeah, graduate school. This is exciting. I can't even remember back that far in my life to before. I don't know. How do you feel, Dan?
Oh, I don't know. I loved. I'm really odd in this regard. I loved everything about graduate school.
Hmm.
Um, it was really wonderful. It was scary at first when I saw how much I would be reading, but it's amazing how quickly you adjust. And I had a wonderful time. I just got to spend all of my time talking about and thinking about history, and I just had a wonderful time in grad school.
Hmm. Because there's so much to read and so much to do, and you think, okay, I've got to pack it all in, you don't remember that, oh my goodness, I'm here specifically to read. Like this is my
Yeah.
goal, to read and enjoy. And it's a fun time.
Hmm. And to break up the sort of the monotony. I mean, I got advice early on that you shouldn't pick out one good place to read. You should pick out lots of very enjoyable places to read. So I would drive around and sit on the banks of the York River, or just sit in the sunken garden. And the great thing was that where I went to grad school at William and Mary was a very small school, and a fairly small school and a small program. So if I sat out there reading, like everybody I knew would come by within a couple hours. So it was really wonderful in that sense. But all master's programs are pretty small, so that's why we identify, incoming classes as cohorts, as like cohesive groups
Mhm.
of people.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I think that when you're an undergraduate at a fairly large school, you tend to forget that you are part of a group and you're moving through your degree with them.
Hmm.
But it becomes much more clear once you start with a methods course and those are your peers. You see them in most of your classes.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool. It's a nice community.
Yeah, it is. At big universities, I mean, the kind of the cohesive element, at least for us, were kind of the dorms or whoever you happen to live with.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be sort of your social group. So it's one of the wonderful things about graduate school that your social group is also kind of your professional
Yeah.
group, your professional associations as well. And so, I mean, you make friends that you can talk about history with, which is really a wonderful thing to have.
Mhm. Now that we have History 200, I've been trying to emphasize the same thing. I mean, Jamie, you might have heard me say this before when you were in History 200 with me, that the people that you work with there, they're going to be your connections, the person that you work with, that you produce a fabulous project with, you'll remember as someone that you can draw on, that you can bounce ideas off of. I'm trying to
Mhm.
reassert this to my class now, but they're kind of like, I don't know, we've just got too much going on. I can't think of these people as network yet, but it's true. It's great.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so it's 7:04. We might as well begin, and if anybody else arrives, we can let them in as they do. So thank you everyone for attending. You'll see that I am recording this session so we can post it on the History Department's YouTube channel for anyone who was unable to attend. I hope that what comes out of this discussion is really an opportunity for people to reflect on their experiences as graduate students and also share those experiences with people who hope to move into that world, which is in some ways very similar to undergraduate studies at university and others vastly different.
Mhm.
And really, this is an opportunity for you guys to sort of look back and look forward at the same time. Um, and ask whatever questions you have. So the way this will work, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Ingram, who is our graduate school, director of the MA program in history. He's going to talk to you a little bit about the program, introduce our new ethnohistory track, and then I'll introduce our panelists and they'll talk a little bit about their experiences, and then we'll open the floor. Go ahead, Dr. Ingram.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that we've been trying to do over the last few years, graduate education has changed a lot in the last couple of decades, and the main way that it's changed, I can't speak for all disciplines, but for a lot of them in the humanities and in the social sciences, one of the things that's changed is graduate education in those fields used to be pretty much kind of professor training. That's pretty much what it was. And terminal master's programs used to be, primarily for people who liked history as an undergraduate and wanted to have another year or two of more advanced study, but without really much thought about what you would do as a career after that. Over the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, there's been a change in that. There are fewer career paths in higher education than there used to be, but there are a lot of other academic research, history-related things that you can do. But those require a bit more of a directed approach. So one of the things that we've tried to do when I got here, Dr. De Silva and I came the very same year. When we arrived, our master's program was pretty much just, there was a thesis track and a non-thesis track. The thesis track was for if you wanted to maybe go on and do PhD work somewhere else, you would do that one, and that would get you prepared for it and give you something to show the admissions officers. And then the non-thesis track was for everybody else. Basically, if you didn't want to go on to PhD, you just wanted to do more history, you wanted to just expand your knowledge, and we have felt that doesn't really address the needs of the career market that's out there. So we've tried to change this and add concentrations. We still have the thesis and the non-thesis track to serve those particular markets, but we've added some specialized concentrations for people who want to take a specific kind of career path. So the first one that we added was a digital concentration in digital history. And we're in the process of revising that one a little bit because our new digital history specialist is also our director of public history. So our digital track is now going to be, hopefully maybe by next fall, sort of a digital public history track. It won't be like the undergraduate public history program where there's an internship structure and everything like that, but it'll be devoted to learning the methods and the practices that are common in doing digital history and in doing public history. We've also added a history teaching, this one's still very new, a history teaching concentration, where you take specialized courses in applying history in the classroom. We devised that primarily, we figured that our best audience for that one would be existing high school teachers. Some of you might remember from high school that there were dual credit classes offered in high school that would give you college credit. Well, to qualify to teach, those teachers need to have 18 graduate credits in their field, not education graduate credits, but in their specific fields for those courses to count toward college. And our idea is that if Indiana's teachers have to come back and take 18 credits to teach those courses, they might just want to get the whole degree. So we offer a specific concentration for anybody interested in teaching those classes or in teaching at the community college or junior college level. And you take 2 specialized courses and you do a special project at the end. And then our newest one is sort of a marriage between history and anthropology. This one will be on the books starting in the fall, and this is our ethnohistory concentration. Ethnohistory is my field. I study Native Americans in colonial America, but we have several faculty members who use ethnohistorical techniques. What ethnohistory is, it's a way of studying the history of people who did not leave written records. because Native Americans, North America, African cultures, Aboriginal cultures in places like Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world. So these are cultures that did not leave or use written records. And because of that, all of the records that we use as historians are created by colonists, essentially. And we don't, even if we read against the grain like anthropologists, it's very difficult to do history that way. So we borrow techniques from anthropologists too, because they're good at studying cultures, using methods that are not rely at all on having primary sources that are written out there. And we also learn their techniques of reading primary sources too, reading sources against the grain to try to derive information that was never intended to be derived from these documents. So in the ethnohistory concentration, students will take a specialized course in ethnohistory in the anthropology department taught by Dr. Murray. And then 2 other courses that are more electives. And at least one of those needs to be in the anthropology department as well. The other one can be in the history department. And then we'll have a number of courses that we'll designate as courses that will be, not required for the ethnohistory concentration, but good for it. So for example, next semester, I'm teaching my graduate seminar on Native Americans in colonial America. And that would be a really good one for anybody who would be interested in the ethnohistory concentration. So these are all designed to give you different career paths. Digital and public history would be very good for people who want to work in museums, in libraries, in public history venues like Conner Prairie. One of our current students in our new cohort this year actually works at Conner Prairie, and he's working toward becoming a director of research there once he gets his master's degree. The ethnohistory concentration prepares you for working in anthropology laboratories, those kinds of things, working in government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, whatever. And history teaching concentration prepares you to teach. And it doesn't give you a license. It's not a licensure program like undergraduate teaching majors, but it prepares you to teach in colleges that allow you to teach with a master's degree, which are community colleges, some 4-year colleges, most 2-year colleges. So that's the way we've set up our program with these concentrations, and the idea is to give you lots of options, to give you lots of choices for the direction that you want to take through the program. They're all the same in some ways. Everybody takes the same opening core class, History 612, and that's sort of our cohort building class, as well as an introduction to historiography and research methods. And then after that, we tailor your program to your interests. It's one of the wonderful things about the humanities. I mean, nothing is too crazy, even if you think that they are. One of my most wonderful meetings was when Noelle Soussis walked in to my office a few years ago. She's one of our graduates who's pursuing a PhD right now, and said, "Can you do social history on tattoos?" And I said, "Oh yes, not only can you, but please do that, because that would be very interesting." Of course you can. That's a wonderful subject in cultural and social history. And she said, "Oh, I was afraid to ask. I didn't know that we could do that." Well, a lot has changed in history. And if you just want to talk about how tattoos have changed, over the years, that's not a very good historical subject. But obviously, tattoos, clothing, the way you present yourself in public says a lot about who you are culturally. So yeah, I mean, we're willing to listen, and we want to make a program that's going to serve your interests and help you actually do something with the rest of your life that is going to be interesting to you and that you'll love. So that's what we're trying to do with our program, and that's why we've set it up the way we have.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a rolling deadline for admissions.
We do.
Correct? Yep. So you can think about it now. You can apply to us, to elsewhere. And traditionally we have another information session after the student history conference.
It's during the Student History Conference, yes.
Yes, sorry, during the Student History Conference. We'll have to see how that works out this year, but we are committed to spreading the word about the MA program as much as we can.
Yeah, a little just about deadlines. For if you're starting in fall semester, we have two deadlines. The first one is usually in the middle of March. And those are deadlines for people who are applying for the fall who want to be considered for funding as a graduate assistant. We have to make those decisions earlier, so we have to have that deadline earlier. If you have alternate sources of funding, or if you're not interested in being a graduate assistant, you have all the way until the middle of July, so kind of July 15th or so, to apply for the fall. And then if you wanted to start in the spring, or in the winter semester, or whatever you wish to call it, in January, the deadline for that one is in November, so about November 15th, roughly. So there are different ones depending upon when you want to start and whether or not you want to try for a graduate assistantship, which are wonderful things to have. They pay for most of your tuition. They give you a stipend of around a little over $10,000 a year these days. They're always subject to funding. So we never actually know that we're going to be able to award them until kind of right before we do. But since I've been doing this, we've always had 6 graduate assistantships to give out. So that's something else to consider. If you want to do that, you have to apply by March.
So I actually might call on Lucas and Will at this point, who are our 2 current MA students, to talk a little bit about their experiences in the program. And then I'm going to talk to Maren, or I should say, ask Maren to talk a little bit about how she thought about applying to graduate programs. So sort of the 2 ways that we're thinking here. So Will, can I ask you to go first, talk a little bit about your experience in the Ball State MA program, how it is similar or different to your experience as an undergraduate here. Classes, are they different? Is your life experience different? And then Lucas, I'll ask you to follow up with your own experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think my experience, I've really enjoyed it. I guess first off, like big picture, it's, I think, challenged me as a historian. My background is in education, so I graduated from Ball State in 2019 with a degree in social studies ed. Wanted to be honest with you, my motivation was I wanted to stay at Muncie for another couple of years for a relationship. And so this was a really good way to do it. And also I knew I wanted to be qualified to teach dual credit in classes like that when I returned to the secondary level. So that was sort of my coming into it. I grew up in like a really small school. So in some ways, having a small, close cohort of graduate students who was really familiar to me and something I really enjoyed. Something I think has been different now that we've been in our current situation, has been kind of having people more spread out and less able to connect socially. Because I've really enjoyed being able to talk to people about whatever you're reading, because most of you are going to be reading the same books for at least some classes, and kind of grow an understanding of how other people think of history. Because there are people in our program who are studying things that I just had never thought about studying before. And like, I'm the only one, most of what I look at is textbooks, and I'm the only person who studies textbooks, but there's still overlap of things that we all study together. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I'm a graduate student, or a graduate assistant, which I've enjoyed for now. This is my 2nd year with it. Had a great time with that. I've actually taught a couple classes when we were in person, which was very natural for me, but was still different than teaching in a secondary level. So if any of you are thinking about that, I mean, that was something that really and this is, I guess, suppose unique, but all 3 of my professors were very open to, of, working with you and what do you find interesting. And that was something that was rewarding to me, to not just be, here's a bunch of things to grade, which is an experience, or in other universities where it's like, you're just going to teach this course. And that's not ever been my experience. So I've enjoyed that. I think it's challenged me to be a better reader and think more not just about historical facts, but the way narratives are constructed and the evidence that's used in them. And I think that's to me the biggest difference, I think, which ironically my social studies background kind of equipped me a little bit for. But to really take that to the next level and then be able to have those skills to really prepare kids better, I think I found really rewarding and enjoyable. Sorry.
Go ahead, Lucas.
All right, so I also did my undergraduate here in anthropology and history, and my history concentration was in public history with the previous advisor, Dr. Michael Doyle. And I also went to a really small high school and was from a really small town in northern Indiana. So not a lot of people had a strong interest in history when I was growing up, and I had to get a lot of that from my family. I grew up with two high school teacher parents. I didn't necessarily think I wanted to teach when I was coming to college, but I want to do something with history. And my dad, when I told him I might want to teach, that little vein in his forehead burst. He said, "I'm not going to let you do that, but you can find something else in the history field." So I started to look into different programs, and I had never heard of public history before. And I'd also never heard the word anthropology until I came to college. Small towns don't really talk about anthropology. But I was fortunate enough to fall into the Ball State Public History program. And it led me down a lot of different paths. I became close friends with a former graduate student here, Nick Miller, and ended up getting a job at a museum in Fort Wayne with him. I worked underneath him as a curatorial assistant. And I wasn't certain if I wanted to go to grad school. I was kind of burnt out with school. I wasn't entirely certain I wanted to go to college after I left high school. And it was very much a last minute decision. I think I emailed Dr. Ingram 2 weeks before the summer deadline. Definitely don't recommend doing that. I would highly recommend planning a little better than I did for your graduate program. But I was worried that they wouldn't accept me how close to the deadline it was. But instead I found a very welcoming faculty. They were willing to help me through everything. Dr. Ingram, I think, replied to my email sometimes super late at night because I had a lot of questions. I was not aware of how to apply to graduate school. I got my letters of recommendation from other faculty members who weren't hesitant to help me, even though the deadlines were coming up. So I definitely recommend it. I also didn't know what to expect my first semester coming in. I knew I wanted to do research. I liked writing. I liked presenting on topics that interested me, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a vague interest in memory, social memory, and folklore from my anthropology background. I'm actually very jealous that there's going to be an ethnohistory concentration now, and I'm going to miss out on that because I definitely would have been part of that. But after speaking to faculty members about these vague interests, they led me down paths, and they kind of suggested a couple of things that really interested me. And the thesis that I'm writing, focusing on World War I commemoration, specifically in Indianapolis, it incorporates a lot of my anthropological background and my public history background, and I owe that to the faculty at Ball State. They're the ones that kind of planted that seed in my mind that maybe that's something that I should look into. The classes seem daunting. I understand that, and it is a heavy reading load, and it's easy to fall behind, but it's also really easy to develop your own path and your own plan, and you kind of, there's not one specific strategy for preparedness that might work for you. You got to find your own niche within it. But it's also great that when you're, like Will said, you're reading the same books as people in your cohort or in your classes in general. And it is nice to be able to discuss ideas. I think as history majors, even in undergrad, you read books and you have an idea of what they're about and you can pull deeper things from them. But there's something about discussing them in a seminar that really helps you find different ideas and kind of pick the brains of those around you. So I highly recommend it overall. I've had a great experience here. And like I said, I wasn't sure I even wanted to do it, but I am certainly glad that I did. And it really helped me find the path that I wanted to take. I still am leaning towards a public history career in the future, but I'm also leaning towards possibly a PhD because I really want to continue the research that I'm doing. So go for it if you have the chance.
I would too like to add, I, like Lucas, did not come from a background where like postgraduate education was an expectation. or anything like that. It's also possible that when I applied, was unaware of what a major and minor field were, and proceeded to learn that over time and possibly fake my way through it at first. That was how little I knew about it. So I think it is a different like world in a way, and you will be far from the least prepared person. And like everyone else will be a little bit confused about what the things mean and like what you're actually supposed to be doing. Because the strange thing is like with your undergraduate, at least I think most people, it takes like at least 4 years. And so, first year is just sort of getting your feet wet. Second year, you start to actually figure out what you're doing. Whereas graduate school is just like hitting the ground running in a new crazy world. And Dr. Ingram will help guide you through it. But to be frank, I didn't know Dr. Ingram as well at the time. So, but yeah, I would say like it will be daunting, but like there will be things and ways to get through it too.
Kind of going off what you said, Will, yeah, you are going to be a little bit confused when you start because it is not like starting undergrad. But on the bright side, you're all confused together. And that's something that you get to bond over for at least a little bit until you find exactly what you want to study and what you want to research.
So I'm going to pull Maren into the discussion because Maren, you graduated from the public history program in 2017 or 18?
2018.
Right. And I seem to recall that you were one of the best prepared people I had ever met. You seemed like you had you knew what was going on, you knew what you were going to do, and you were just ready to go. It was great. So tell us a little bit about how you decided to do a master's and how you looked around and found a school that fit your needs and what it was like starting out.
Absolutely. I'll start by saying that's all an illusion. I was terrified, and I felt like my grad program search was completely haphazard, and I felt a lot of anxiety around it. And that's one of my main pieces of advice is everyone I have spoken to says that they had the worst strategy when they applied. So I think there is no right strategy. You just kind of like go all in and figure out what's right for you. So I did public history and women and gender studies at Ball State. And when I started looking, I had just kind of assumed I would go to IUPUI because I knew they had a public history program. Both of my parents have master's degrees, so I'm in a little bit of a different position where I just kind of anticipated that I would launch right into a master's degree. I don't know that I necessarily had the best reason, except that I knew that I wanted like more education. And I was in Dr. Ayalon's class, and he asked me why I was planning to stay in Indiana, and I had absolutely no answer. So at that point, I kind of like recalibrated and did like a whole new search for a public history program. And at one point, I also looked at PhD programs, but in a conversation with Dr. De Silva, actually, you told me, you're like, I don't think you want a PhD yet, like maybe eventually, but I think you really want to like be practicing and like out there doing something. So I applied to 6 programs, public history and museum studies, because I didn't understand the difference. And one of my main questions was I would go to the public history people and I'd be like, why public history and not museum studies? And then I would go to the museum studies people and like, why museum studies? So I kind of eventually feel like I fell into public history as being the best approach for me. I think for me, it being slightly more theory-based than museum studies are slightly more practice-based worked really well. I ended up deciding on American University in DC, which is technically a history master's program and then a concentration in public history, which works really well for me. It was a heavy history environment, but our public history program is really, really strong. I still say I graduated in May 2020, or graduated, stared at Zoom for a while. But I visited AU briefly for like a single day and met with some people in the spring of 2018, and it felt just immediately right. I then visited another school just because I felt guilty that I had only visited AU, and but I had such a good feeling at AU that I ended up here. My cohort was, I think we started out at 15 people, which to me seemed really great. GW's Museum Studies program is more like 30 plus, seemed like too many. So I wanted a fairly close knit group of people who are all focused on public history. And so that was really important to me. And I would say that I would also kind of echo Will and Lucas in that the like community that you build in graduate school is really important. I didn't feel like a huge sense of community at Ball State in the history department necessarily. I was really involved in the honors college. And so that was really different for me once I came to grad school. And I think that's probably the thing I value most is that anytime I'm working on something related to public history, I have a whole group of people that I can like send a text to, shoot an email to, and then we'll just like have a conversation about how best to phrase something or the best approach to something. So I really valued that. I'll also say AU is an expensive school. I think I had the perception that all master's programs covered finances and that you would get great financial aid. In public history, that's largely not true. So I ended up with a fellowship working on a project called the Humanities Truck that ended up cutting my, giving about half tuition remission, and then I had an annual stipend as well. But like everyone else has said, it's a constant hustle. So I was picking up contract jobs, doing like weekend research jobs for professors passing through the city. So I think that's been a big part of my experience is both kind of like the hustle and the sprint that is grad school, but then also doing kind of the professionalization on the side, which AU really encourages, which has been exactly the experience I wanted. A heavy academic schedule, but then also really focused on kind of the professionalization.
So I'm going to ask all three of you, what do you wish you had known before arriving in the graduate school classroom? I mean, was there something that you were like, nobody told me about this, or this is the most amazing thing. Why didn't anyone say anything? I mean, or anything else? Is there something that you feel that you need to share?
It sounds more daunting than it is. I think, I was very scared of just the application process in general, which is why I kept putting it off and off and off until I absolutely couldn't anymore. But it's not as bad as you think to apply or to even participate in, because, I mean, obviously you show interest because you're interested in history in general, but this is where you really get to do what you want to do and read what you want to read and study what you want to study. And I did not necessarily have that perception of it going in. I think I would have applied a lot sooner, if I had.
I think to kind of build on that point too, I feel like I had to learn that my interests are flexible. Like I wanted a plan, I wanted to be really confident in what I wanted to study. But I went in, I know all during my orientations, I was like, museum education is it for me. And then I learned it was apparently it for everyone else. And then all of our interests changed. So I now do a lot more kind of like community history, like activist history and oral history, which I never did oral history with Dr. Doyle when I was at Ball State. But then I immediately kind of launched into that once at AU. So I just think being really open and like not expecting yourself to have a perfect plan or set interests, which is one good thing about the master's is you kind of have that flexibility versus PhD. You need a bit more of a set idea for what you're interested in doing.
I think my biggest thing is I just wish I had understood how to do like what graduate school meant, and I think I probably asked some more questions. I think that would have been helpful, only just because I think I like lived in great fear of not understanding how things worked and ended up being totally fine. But because graduate programs are all different, so like a general load, I think Dr. Ingram is for us is 2 or maybe 3 classes. But I have a friend who's in psychology, and our normal load for them is like 5 classes. So, but her 5 classes, my impression is, are roughly the same amount of work as taking 2 or 3 of ours. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, you know, if you have someone who you know is in a master's program doing something else, there'll be some overlap, and there'll be some ways they're totally different. But I agree. I think with what you two have always already said, being flexible and understanding how like methods are important, and like learning how you do history and the sources that you use, because for instance, there's a lot of things that I've learned while being a GA that I never had any interest in pursuing or really thought about because it's just not quite in my wheelhouse. And now I've learned how to do those things. And so it's opened my eyes to how newspapers are sources, which of course we know that they are, but it's like, who reads the newspaper? You know, it's like, so there's just little things like that that you'll pick up along the way. Or one of the just interesting things is Dr. Stefan, I remember mentioning to me, he's like, well, I think he's a really good character. And just like that idea of like, sometimes you follow someone because they're interesting and they represent something, even if, you know, they're not the most famous person or, you know, things like that. They help you to understand things better, and draw in readers. It's just, so little things like that you'll pick up along the way, even though like he studies a period of history that's like 50 or 80 years before what I studied. So I agree with what you all said already.
One thing I would advise anyone who's kind of like looking at different programs is ask to talk with current grad students. I served as a grad representative for the last year of my program. And so I was kind of like on call if students were going to be visiting campus to get coffee with people. And I think that's really important, asking for someone kind of beyond their typical admissions people. Even if they have the student working in admissions to talk to you, you should find someone really specifically from the program you're interested in, because they'll tell you stuff about like the department culture that you won't find out otherwise. They can talk to you about like what their relationships are like with professors, what the workload is like. I know I spoke with a student at Ball State actually about AU's program to talk about like cost of living, and just those like really kind of like nitty gritty questions that maybe like the professor on the other end of the line isn't going to be able to answer as satisfactorily for you. I think it's really important.
So Jamie and Emily, I'm going to open the floor to you guys. What questions do you have?
Yeah, I was just wondering, especially with like COVID, if you thought it would be beneficial to like actually like visit the campus in terms of like programming. I mean, I know you said to talk to somebody, but I didn't know if like in general visiting the campus kind of like determines like where you want to go. Or I know like for me, like when I was looking for like colleges when in high school, like obviously like going to the place like kind of solidifies like why you want to go there, if that makes sense.
I'd say visiting AU made a huge difference for me. It's hard to advise during COVID. Harder perhaps here for me because none of our schools here are open. No, there are no universities on campus in DC. I think if it becomes an option, it's a good thing to do. One thing I'll say about grad school that was really different to me is that I felt highly involved in like the Ball State campus. And I was local to Muncie, so I was really used to being super involved, kind of in whatever my immediate community was. And grad school is very different in that I got super, super involved in my program and department. And I didn't really have as much of a concept of the rest of the campus at AU, which is fairly small. I tried to really hard to be pretty involved in kind of like local communities and neighborhoods in DC, especially through my work with the humanities track. But I think if you get a good sense for the department and the program, you might not need that visit. But I would say for me personally, visiting AU still kind of is part of what decided it for me.
I think if you are definitely really interested in Ball State or whatever school it is, I think doing it would be a good idea, as long as you keep in your mind, like, I'm getting a slightly different perspective because of COVID. Though ironically, like, there's a decent chance that that will be the same perspective you experience in the fall, just depending on where things turn out. I came from Southern Indiana and had never been remotely near Ball State. And so it was helpful for me to have visited when I did my undergraduate here, because I just had no idea. Southern Indiana is way hillier than Northern Indiana. I flipped out whenever I drove up and I was like, this whole state is flat. My life is a lie. And so I think that's helpful, especially if that's something that you feel like you need. Like, then I would definitely encourage you to do it. I think in the department, there are at least some classes that are meeting in person. I don't know if there are any graduate classes that are currently meeting in person.
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Ingram could probably give like more information about like what that would even look like at Ball State, or other universities. But I would say like graduate school, like you're gonna probably spend most of your time in like one building or two buildings maybe. At least that's my experience here. So it's different, whereas it's not gonna be like, oh, it's such a like, spread out campus. It's gonna be like, oh, I like the history department building. This is great, or this is horrible. Like, and the rest of the surroundings is sort of part of it. But that's just my take on it.
I have to agree with you, Will. I think it's important going in. I definitely recommend visiting, but as long as you keep in the back of your mind that you're getting a different experience than an undergraduate would, also different experience than you would have 2 years ago, given the current pandemic situation in terms of seeing a lot of people in the hallways or in the building in general. And I also agree with Maren that when I was an undergrad, I felt very involved in the university as a whole, less so in the individual departments. And that even though I went to the same school for graduate school, it flipped. I'm very involved in the department now and less in the university. And yeah, agreeing with Will, it's there, but you spend most of your time in the one building and you come to love it dearly.
And the library.
Yeah. We do have some graduate courses that are meeting in person this semester. Both Dr. Alvis and I are teaching graduate seminars. I'm teaching History 612, which currently is just the modern historiography seminar, but that'll be changing next year. We'll be adding research methods to it. And Dr. Alvis is teaching a wonderful seminar on magic and witchcraft, which sounds like a blast. I wish I could take it. But yeah, I mean, he's actually, when the weather was nicer, he was meeting outside with people. And so we're adjusting. The good thing about seminars is they tend to be small. I mean, they're kept at 15 people. And it's pretty rare that we actually have 15 people in a seminar. Usually it's, 8 to 12, or even maybe a little less than that. So yeah, we are meeting in person sometimes, but a lot of our classes are being held only online or on Zoom. I've done about half of my seminars on Zoom this semester just because I want to limit the amount of time people are spending on campus. When people have visited from off campus who are interested in the program, I would always meet with them, take them around the department, see who was in their office, just duck in and casually introduce the student to some of our faculty. And obviously that's not the kind of thing I can do now. Most of our faculty are not in their offices most of the time because of COVID. I would also take them down to the graduate assistants room and introduce them to whatever graduate students were around. And this year that room is closed because of COVID. So it's made a lot of changes, but I think it's a very valuable thing to do, to visit a campus, to meet the people there, to realize that they're people who will help you out and help you adjust to graduate life. I think it's a really good thing to do. Obviously, like everything else, there's a lot of good things that you can't do as well because of the pandemic. But that's not going to be the way it is forever. And if there's a safe way to do it, I still recommend making a visit if you can.
I will say one thing too with the idea of visiting and even things I wish I had known before. I have a friend in the program who's not here tonight, but he came from another university to Ball State specifically to work with one person. And because he wanted that sort of like to help mentor, and so that he had someone who was already engaged in the field, and that person ended up leaving, but they still have like a relationship there. And so while I wouldn't make that by any means your only like factor, but if you are considering different universities, some of them specialize in certain things. Like I know Dr. Ingram said, William and Mary, early American studies is the thing. But but I think that would be helpful, and it's something that never occurred to me because you do build those relationships, and you're far different than I think one undergraduate student who has sort of like casual interest in like, oh, I really like World War II, and it's like, well, that's different, you know. And I think that would be something that I maybe would have considered and would be helpful, I think, for you too, if you're, you know, sort of if you have an idea what your interests are, and then to look at the faculty and be like, oh, they do actually have specialists and people who have written in this field or fields similar to it, because I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, some of the advice I've heard along those lines recently is to look across the department. So you might have that one person you're really interested in working with, but making sure there are a couple other people doing things that you're interested in. So that way, if that one person leaves, or if you maybe just like don't click that well with that one person, then you have other people to turn to and you're not left in kind of a lurch. It's happened recently to a friend of mine in the PhD program. And she's making a really great plan B, but she just didn't click with the person she was going to be her advisor. So it's a little bit different being PhD, but I think it applies at MA as well. One thing I really valued about AU is that public history is really well respected in the department because it is kind of the core of the department and as a program. And so, and being located in DC, actually a lot of the professors kind of help curate exhibits or like lend assistance at the Smithsonian occasionally. So just having people across the department who really respect public history, who get public history and its methods was really, really supportive for me.
I agree with that. And I think you learn kind of pick the brains of multiple people that have just vague similar interests to you. So I knew coming in, like I said, that I wanted to focus on memory and military history. I had no idea what I wanted to do with that. So I was given the name of Dr. Malone in the department and just went to speak with her in general, not about anything in particular. And she brought up commemoration. And I said, I like monuments, so maybe we'll see what we can do with that. And then I went with that for a few months, and then I went to speak to Dr. Connolly, and he said, well, have you ever heard of the Indiana World War Memorial? And it just got more and more narrow based on ideas from other people, and maybe I'm just easily persuaded. I don't know, but I like to think that it was just me building off of multiple people in the department.
Okay, yeah, so I've got a question. So you guys were saying that there's like, I think it was like somewhere around like 3 classes or something you would take every semester, something like that. So like that workload, how would like workload like 3 grad school classes compare to like a regular like undergrad like semester when you're taking like 5 classes?
One thing I'll say is that I will maintain that I was never busier than I was as a junior or senior at Ball State. But the busyness changed for masters. Like I said, it's a sprint. I also did 3 classes. The second half of our program, you switch to part-time, but you don't take the summer off. So I basically like started fall of 2018 and I did not stop until spring 2020. The general thing for my program is like a book per class and then additional articles. So if you have 3 classes, you can basically expect to read at least 3 books that week. And then also some additional writing and additional articles.
I think, yeah, I would say that that's probably fairly representative of Ball State. In my experience, was always much busier, I think, as a graduate student. But that's partly because, and I think I've noticed as a trend with Ball State, if you're a GA, you have sort of another job too. And so you may run into someone who either isn't working or works only during the summer, who have different experiences. I would say that those classes in no way like account 1-to-1 for like a undergraduate course. Like they're definitely more work than an undergraduate course. But it also depends too on how you approach each class, and how fast of a reader you are and things like that. Because I definitely have become a better reader and a more efficient reader, we'll say. Because if you looked at something from my first year of graduate school, I highlighted and annotated everything. And it's pathetic and incredible that I did that. And I feel stupid now in hindsight. And you all shouldn't do that because it'd be horrible. But because I just wanted to learn everything. And it's like you learn to sort of focus on the main ideas and the things you want to talk about. And that speeds it up a little bit, but they're definitely, and they're a significant amount of work, I'll say that. Your total number of assignments will also probably shift too. I mean, maybe you all expect this, but it wouldn't be unheard of to have like, I don't know, maybe a half dozen assignments for a class, you know, and there'll be bigger assignments and there'll be other things in between. But instead of having, you know, one thing every week, you may have classes that have that, you may have classes that don't have that. So the structure is also something that'll change too.
You lose the busy work, I think, is a big part of it. So you do get thrown in to, I agree with Maren, like a book a week plus some articles, usually per class. And I was a big annotator too beforehand. I still am to an extent, but you learn to find the main ideas in a book, find what you need to talk about, find what's important for you to write your paper. Then for me, you know, that doesn't mean I don't read it. You know, I am guilty of not reading everything. I think Will can attest to that. But you read what you have to, and then if it's something that I like, I'll put it aside, and then I'll go back and I'll read the entire thing and annotate the whole thing and get my highlighter out on my own time personally. But you definitely learn a lot better time management through this workload. And yeah, I became a better reader through it. I became definitely a better writer through the program. And it's refreshing to not have all these little assignments due every single day of class. It's nice to only focus on the big things that you see that they're much more important, they're much more helpful.
Yeah, and it's an entirely different kind of reading. We spent like weeks my first year kind of like talking about like how to gut a book, like how you get those main ideas, how you read for methods, how you read for theory, and kind of just approaching it entirely differently. Some of the other best advice I got when I was starting is to make all of your interests talk to each other and all of your class talk to each other. So if I did like a historiography paper my fall of my first year in grad school, and then I used it basically every semester after that because I was trying to concentrate. Well, some of my research has been in reproductive justice, so trying to keep all of that kind of in conversation with each other, doing projects that build on each other, so that you're not constantly learning like a new historiography or trying to learn a new conversation in the field. So kind of trying to keep all of that really focused is really, really helpful.
And I think part of that too, my main interest is in textbooks, and one particular textbook author. So I'm never going to, no matter what university I attended, have a course on that topic. It just won't happen. But that doesn't mean that I still can't use it sort of through especially the general courses here, because a lot of times you'll have your professor, Dr. Ingram or whoever it is, but you'll also have sort of an advisor who's more in that field who will help support you with the paper. And then that may be your thesis person or just sort of someone who helps you along the way. But then I'm in a course now on witchcraft. And I took that class largely because that class fulfilled my last requirement for graduation. So it wasn't a field that like I chose. I was like, yes, witchcraft. But I'm actually now looking at witchcraft trial handbooks, which are essentially textbooks for hunting witches. So it's like you can sort of engage in like strange comparison studies of like, well, this is how they're constructing a narrative. And I know that because I've done this in this other class, and like things like that are helpful and in some ways help you to grow in strange ways that you didn't think. Like, this is pretty cool. I didn't think I would ever do this.
I did have a question for like the Ball State's graduate assistantship. In terms of like when you're applying to the master's program, are you automatically like applying as well for the GA program, or is there like a separate application for that? I kind of got confused like on the website on what exactly you had to do. And then also, what exactly do you look for in terms of like qualifications when you're trying to determine like who to give the assistantship to? If that's something you can share.
Yes, it is. When you do your online application, it will ask you whether or not you're interested in a graduate assistantship. we used to have kind of a dual application process for this, but we don't do that anymore ever since we went to the online application system. Now we ask everybody when they apply to give us the contact information for 3 recommenders, people who will write letters of recommendation for you. And we ask everyone who applies to supply a letter of intent or a statement of purpose or whatever you wish to call it, a cover letter explaining why you're interested in graduate study, and we ask for a curriculum vitae, an updated, up-to-date CV, and then a writing sample, which is usually your best undergraduate paper. When you're applying for a graduate assistantship, the only thing that we ask that you do differently is to either give us a separate letter of intent for the graduate assistantship, and I usually just communicate that to students who have applied, or to work it into the statement of intent that you're already writing. So just, you know, work as you're explaining why you think advanced study in history is the right thing for you. Also explain why you're interested in a graduate assistantship, why you think you would be good at it, why you would like to assist a faculty member, and anything else that may come to mind. So that's the only thing that you do differently. We no longer require the GRE. We used to require that only for people who are applying for graduate assistantships, and following the trend of the university, we're phasing it out entirely. The only people who still have to give us a GRE are people who are coming in as probationary students by the rules of the grade, and that's a graduate school rule. It's really not ours. So we don't require that anymore. Essentially, everybody does the same kind of application, except that we ask you to address the graduate assistantship a little bit on your application letter. And then if you have any other questions, of course, you can ask me. But yeah, as long as you check that box, I'm automatically going to consider your application for a graduate assistantship. And once you've applied, I will be contacting you before the deadline for, you know, the March deadline, to make sure that everybody has their folios up to date, make sure that I have all the documents and everything like that. The application process has changed a lot for us in the last 2 years, but it hasn't changed that much for students. So it's a pretty straightforward process for all of you. Basically, the way it works now is that we get the applications first. We advise the graduate school on whether or not to accept them, and it's a much more streamlined process than it used to be. So nothing too hard about it, but you don't have to worry about not having all your materials in for the application or anything, because I could be pretty annoying about reminding students to make sure I have their materials. I don't want anybody to miss out on funding if it can be avoided.
Yeah, and I would say too, as far as how the process goes, I did the entire process from start to finish while student teaching on a US military base in Germany.
Yeah, that's right.
And while I would not encourage you to do it that way, it in fact can be done. And so, which I thought was really daunting, because I don't know what the two of yours backgrounds are, but I did not have a family who ever thought about a master's really. And so having just, if no one has told you, like, you can in fact apply, like it would not be that difficult to apply. And I would highly encourage you to apply for a graduate assistantship too.
On that note, it's slightly related. Having people who will read your materials to apply is really important. Dr. Eilon gave me a lot of support while I was applying, as did a couple other professors. And because you want eyes on those who are used to reading them. So if you have any professors who you consider a mentor, or who you might be able to ask for some feedback, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yes, I should say anyone who writes you a letter of recommendation should also read your statement of interest. And something I said earlier, but what I want to reassert now is, yes, we're absolutely advertising the Ball State program, but you should also apply to other places as well. And look around, see what other programs are out there. Don't be like me. My first year out of a bachelor degree, I applied to one school. I really didn't have a clue. They didn't accept me. So then I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. It all worked out in the end, clearly, but give yourself options, talk to other faculty, other students, figure out what other people are doing, and build on your friends, your professors, find out what they have to say, and don't be afraid to ask them. They will say yes. They will say yes. Other questions? Oh, go
And the
ahead.
other thing I should add, when you're applying to other programs outside of Ball State, it's true here too, but when you're applying to, I get a lot of questions from undergrads who ask, you know, am I going to know what I need to know about this other program? You know, I looked on their website and it's not very helpful. And just like you can ask us, you know, the wonderful thing about email is that you can ask anybody anything you want. And with very few exceptions, I've never known a faculty member anywhere who will not help a prospective student and answer their questions. So if you have questions about a program, just email their graduate director or even their office supervisor, and you'll be able to talk to somebody who will give you a lot of information. Don't work just on what's on the website, because there's a big difference between qualities of websites around, and they don't correlate at all with the quality of the program or the faculty. It's a totally different kind of thing. A lot of it depends on money, and so don't just rely on that. Definitely ask questions. Faculty members and your fellow students are always your best sources of information.
Any other questions? Okay, well, hearing none. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that you all have a good evening. This has been great. I may well call on you again in some future year. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night. Take care.
Thank you all very much. Hope to hear from you again.
And feel welcome to share my email if you think it'd be useful for Emily and James or anyone else.
Wonderful.
Well,
Thank you, guys.
Night. Thanks for having me.
Night.
Bye.
Nice
Good
to
see
see
you again,
everyone.
man.